What does it truly mean when you call camp home? Hello, Camp Mavericks. I'm Travis Allison from Go Camp Pro. I am a summer camp marketing and strategy consultant, and I help camps translate what they do so more parents insist on sending their children to summer camp.
Hi, my name is Chris Hudson. I am the camp director of Camp Highlight, the best camp in the universe. It's a sleepaway camp for kids who have LGBTQ parents.
And my name is Gabrielle Rail. I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro. Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains, and we focus on creating a positive environment for gender minorities.
And my name's Joe Richards. I am the guitar player at Pierce Williams Chapel, which is a summer camp in Pierce Williams is a summer camp and part of the United Church Canada's camping network. We're located about halfway between Detroit and Toronto.
Welcome, all three of you. That's my my new idea to plant. We have to come up with crazy introductions for the last but specific introductions for
no lies, all true.
No, yeah, only true things. Yeah.
For the last show of the season, which is coming up very soon.
No facts, no printers.
I want to welcome the three of you to the show. We have been talking about what it means when camp is home, and have tentatively titled this "Just because it's home to you doesn't mean other places can't be." But I do really want to explore this idea of so many people think of camp as kind of being their emotional home throughout the year, and that it is a place that a lot of people find centering or sort of need a touchstone of camp in a year to make the rest of the year work, for good and bad. And so I want to really explore that idea today. And we had some big thoughts going into this. And Chris, I wonder if just when I introduce the topic, what are the first things that come to mind to you?
About emotional home. I love this idea because doing camp for so long, when you go to camp, there's something that happens. There's something that happens to you, emotionally, internally. And when you leave, it's really hard to replicate. So I think we should define what emotional home means for people who are listening.
Yeah, let's do that.
We need to make sure that that we're all on the same page. So the way that I think about this is that there is a particular environment that we set up at camp for the kids, for the staff. It's sort of like there's a giant dome, a container over the place where just sort of the values, the sort of mores, the culture is so different, and we lean into it so much. We give our heart into it. And I think, and now I'm just talking from my perspective and what I hope I'm doing for the kids at my camp, there's something that makes me relax when I'm there. There's a pressure that's gone at camp. And I think that's the thing I think of when you talk about emotional home. There's something about it that feels correct. Now, I don't know if that's just because I'm a 30-year going on camp person, or if everyone has that effect, but there's something about it that even me, as a director, at my most tired at 1 a.m. in the morning, inputting sheets into the computer, there's still something about it that feels very comfortable and very at home. So that's what I think about. Anybody else? I want to make sure we're all on the same page with that. Yeah. So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Okay, great. For Gab and Joe, I mean, the idea of camp being home is literal for you. Gab from having grown up there, and Joe from living on site for so many years. But I think from, kind of addressing a seasonal staff member's perspective, and we're trying to talk to camp directors, so I want people to think like a camp director in here, but addressing people who come and go from our organization that aren't armpits deep in it or eyeballs deep in it all year round, that they have a different experience. Emotional home for you, Gab, is that true?
Yeah, it's true. And I think that the shift between there's different stages of understanding why camp is an emotional home, from camper to CID to staff to full-time person that works for camp. And I think the shift is from experience, and it just happens, to the creator, and being intentional about how do we create a space where hopefully the majority of the participants feel like they can be themselves at camp. And we know that camp does not feel like a safe space for everybody, does not feel like an emotional home for everyone. And our industry has a lot of work to do in you know, in the work of appropriation and queer inclusion and BIPOC inclusion. But I think that for me, my main goal with my campers and my staff members is one, that they have that experience, that this is where they feel held. And then hopefully within our staff, they start to learn how to create that for themselves outside of camp. And that truly is relationship based. How can you start to, one, acknowledge what you need and want, and how can you ask that from somebody else and make it a space for them too? And I think that transition is really difficult to do, even if you have all of that knowledge and the experience.
I think that what Gabz is there's two things that really stick out to me: the idea of intentional, and I love that phrase, to be held, right? Like, this is where they come to be held and to be molded, right? This idea, Pierce Williams, I started at Kenneseri very young, right? You start as a CIT at the age of 15, and so you're in a very formative place after your first year of high school, and you have this summer experience with people who are, every summer built up to that led you to this place, and then you have this different experience where you're counselor in training, and it just can change you entirely and change your entire being. And I think the safety of that emotional home is something that people feel and sadly might not have at where they rest their head at night. I'm careful not to call that place home, because home has nothing to do with where you rest your head at night.
Exactly.
Home has everything to do with where you feel you are welcomed. And I think the challenge with summer camp is making sure that we give them the tools and the power to create that home, their home, wherever they are, right? That they, I think that we'd be doing a disservice to our staff and to our seasonal staff if we said you have to be at camp to feel emotionally safe, because we should all, the things we need to pass on to kids and to youth is that you have the right to feel emotionally safe wherever you are. And here are the tools to do those things. And here's why we do this at camp. I recently hired a new camp director. A previous staff member came back after 5 or 6 summers away, needing a summer job, and we needed a summer camp director. And what she described is actually my first experience stepping away from my first camp, right? My emotional home at Kenneseri, growing up there. I then went to another camp, which was a bit further away, not that far away in reality, but a bit further away. And that whole summer, I felt like I just couldn't, something wasn't there, right? Something didn't feel right. I was at this other camp. I was working with kids with varying abilities, and I just didn't feel. And what I figured out is that because I'd grown up at a religious camp, you're all there at least for some reason, right? Or you're on a discovery journey of some nature to discover your spirituality and where you're going. And I realized that, oh, well, they haven't replaced that here at this other camp. And oddly enough, my camp director who's working for us this year, Piper, she went to that exact same camp that I had worked at. That was my first experience away. And she said, yeah, it just didn't feel, she put it on the one thing, she put it on chapel, which I'm the guitar player at chapel. She said, well, they don't have chapel, and that's what's missing. And we had a longer conversation about it, and it was missing. But it's this idea, when we give emotional safety to people, it's because we're intentional and we create that feeling, and helping them create that feeling outside of camp should be one of the things that we try to do as well, which I'm not sure if social media does that or if private groups, right? They try to create their own things there as well.
Well, I mean, before we spend more time on what do we create and why, and then how do we apply it, I think it's worth saying, I've said this on the show before, that some of my greatest struggles in life have been after a camp season, adjusting to adjusting to life without being a camp counselor when it was seasonal for me. You know, as a camp director, it's like now this place that I live is empty, and it's been full of bodies. But those moments have all been really challenging. And before we got recording, Chris, you were talking about transitions out of camp mode into into what Beth and I have taken to call in the mundane world, and um, the challenges in that. What sort of stuff would you advise camp directors to be thinking about for that transition, Chris?
You know, oh, that's a different question. I thought you were going to ask me. Okay, but I'm ready. I, at Camp Highlight, we'll talk a lot about when the kids arrive. We talk about like the space that we're creating, and we talk a lot about the fact that, like, if you are in the regular world, people can be sharp and sarcastic, and it closes us down from expressing ourselves. Because if I'm like, hey, I love board games, someone's like, that's lame, why do you like that? Then it shuts me down. And so we work actively at camp that every time you express yourself, everyone is enthusiastic about it. Everyone wants to hear more of it. Tell me more. Oh my God, I love that you love that. Oh my God, there's no yucking of yums. And so, on the last day, we talk a lot about when you get home. We try and prepare the kids. We don't do so great with the staff because I just figure, first time staff, they're going to experience it anyway, no matter what I say. But for the kids, we try to prepare them like, when you go home, you're going to be stuck in this mode. And we try and impart to them, it's not a bad place to be. It's not a bad place to remain this enthusiastic when you get home, even if people shut you down, because the key is that if everyone did this, then that place would be this place, that's part of our goal, actually, is to make the rest of the world the way it is at camp. Because transitioning out of camp, when you get home, everyone listening to this knows what I'm going to say. When you get home, the fact that you're not wearing a lanyard, the fact that like you see children you don't recognize and you're like, oh my gosh, whose are they? It takes a while to really settle into that. It takes a while to settle back into whatever your real world hygiene routine is, because we can be really flexible at camp, but on the subway, you don't want to be that flexible. Do you know what I mean? Like the people around you don't want you to be that flexible. I think those things are really hard. And I think preparing staff for it, that's something that I keep thinking about. I'm sort of like a throw in the deep end of the pool with the first year staff. It's probably not the best way to do it, because I always tell them, I can't prepare you for what's going to happen. And they like write it off like, oh, whatever. I wasn't here a week ago. I'm going to go home. Like, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, okay. And then on Slack, they're like, I cry every night. I'm like, I told you, I warned you of this. So I think camp directors could better prepare staff for it, because and hear me out, I don't think it's a really bad thing, like that transitory malaise. I don't think it's a really bad thing for people to experience, because I think it helps them appreciate the experience more and underscores what a special space that we are making, and when it hits the staff, I'm like, imagine how it's hitting the kids. And I think that can be really instructive. I don't know, am I being cruel? It's like some sort of like weird psychological experiment, but I think it can be very useful for staff to feel that way, especially first year staff, because I think that's what gets them to come back. Oh, now I do sound really manipulative.
Well,
I don't know. Can we listen to all that before we release it? I don't
know. Isn't camp all about being intentionally manipulative? Manipulative might not be the word that we want to use, but you're
that anyone but you would use, Joe.
Well, I would use it, and I often talk about the fact that I would much rather deal with young staff, because we can warp their brains. We can make them love camp more, and shape them into who we want to be. I don't think manipulative has to be seen from the negative context. I don't think.
Okay.
I'm going to think about that.
All right.
You're right. We do intentionally. I'm sorry, Gabz.
I think there's intention.
I'm going to sign on +1 to that.
I was going to say intentionality. I think the difference between manipulation and intentionality is that intentionality you can also be transparent about. whereas manipulation, you can't.
Right.
And the idea of intention is there is a goal that hopefully is serving the person and then also serving the community. And so again, language is language, and you can frame it how you want. But I think that transitions are difficult, and our staff members, our campers, ourselves will all experience transitions in such a different way, depending on the type of support they have when they get home, depending on the links that they are able to continue after camp or not, the type of person that they are. Some people, when they're in camp, and when they're out, they're out. And that's how it works for them.
Totally.
I think that the thing that I find sometimes tricky is that we never want people to go home and say, why can't I recreate this camp magic? Or at camp, I'm so outspoken and confident, but then now that I'm in high school, I feel small, and that's me. Why can't I just be this? And I think that's something that is worth talking about, is that what do you have control over? What do you have power over, and what don't you? And sometimes these are forms of protection. And it's just about getting, telling our staff members, our campers, and ourselves, what am I setting up for myself when I get home? Is there a routine that I've adapted at camp that I want to continue and try? Are there people that I do want to reach out to? What's going to be difficult about starting my job or school? What's going to be hard? And just acknowledging it helps. So just that transitions are difficult. And but again, what camp can do is just create those small little conversations. And some people, as you say, Chris, are inexperienced or maybe even in denial. And so they might say, I'm going to be fine. I was, just a week, I'll be fine, and then they get to, but just that conversation that they had, they're like, oh, that's what Chris was talking about. But now I don't feel so alone because we did have that conversation. I see a lot of camp directors that don't take the time during that transition. And I think that does contribute to creating the mundane world, because we don't take that time to say, what do I need after camp? What's going to bring me joy? What's going to bring me happiness? What's going to bring me connection? And we jump right back into work, or we just shift gears so rapidly. And I think we don't do that for ourselves enough. And I'd like to see our industry take a little bit more care when we're transitioning in and out of camp.
I think that's incredibly important. I think it's important to acknowledge it at camp that this is going to be hard. Doing it for our campers and for our staff. I think it's important to reiterate that at the end of their staff's time at camp, to say, I'm sure you're eager to go home. We're all tired. We've really left it all here, and I admire you for that. But there are going to be some challenges and thoughts. And I think just the value of having being a camp director who reaches out 3 or 4 days after they get home in some way that's appropriate for that staff member, that works for that staff member, and doing a check-in is it's great example. It's great intentionality. You're showing your staff what it means to care for others. Frankly, it is retention. It's staff retention. If their last big emotion about camp is this drop down, then that's not a positive end necessarily. Eventually what'll be in their head will be the, I think a lot of the negative stuff goes away, but I'm speaking from my own. When I was a seasonal staff member, that transition was incredibly hard for me. And I've really struggled with it. And I think a little bit of reach out could have helped me. So I'm proposing that it could help your staff as well. Now,
but I need to underline, just before we move on,
please,
the down that you get really highlights the up that you had. So I would like to think that staff, that's what's activated for staff. I don't know anyone who's ever been like, oh my God, the transition was so hard, I can't do that again. It makes them be like, oh my God, that transition was so hard, I can't wait to get back. That's
fair.
what I was trying to
Yep,
say before.
yep,
Like,
totally
I mean,
fair.
we should totally help our staff when they are having difficulty. Yes. But it doesn't feel like critical, like we might lose the staff member. I think if anything like that, the down might help us retain them. Oh God, I sound like a super villain. Okay, I'm going to go on mute.
Now, one of the things I wonder is if all of us on the show are of a certain age, and when we were seasonal staff members coming home, there was an actual separation of the camp from camp people that I feel like staff don't have. That the staff are so connected to their camp people. It was one of the things with smartphones and social media that was such a struggle for me as a camp director who loved the little intentional world that we created. Was one of the weird changes was that our staff and the people that work for us began to refer each other with camp names, began to refer each other by their by their given name. But instead of, when we were at camp, like we spent these intense months together and we get together for a reunion and, might be a couple phone calls through a year or a couple letters. Like we just kept our camp names because that was our place. It was the thing that brought us together. But now people are so tied on a day to day that maybe the transition is easier for them because it's not what I went through, which was, just basically a complete end. And maybe it's not. I don't know, but I think it is a different experience today going home from camp at the end of the season because the connection with your camp peers can continue. The connection with the camp organization can continue if your camp director's smart.
I think, yes, absolutely. I remember a time back in the 90s, like you just go, it's like being on a reality show in lockdown. Like you go away for 6 weeks and you come back, you're like, what celebrities died? Like what, you're completely
Totally.
Yep.
out of the loop. Like you look at the TV
Yeah.
schedule, like what even are these shows? Like where did these come from? Today it's a little bit different because even if you have a no phone policy at camp, your staff has their phones and they're looking at them at night and they're getting updated, not just on what's happening in the world, but on their daily lives. It's harder to separate that out. Before we started recording, we were talking about if sort of like the transition changing that we're talking about is mitigated by the fact that people can be on contact with social media.
Yeah.
And I think I would say no. I would say no, because I think the container that we make at camp is so much about face to face, like body to body, like person to person, and like group mechanics in a way that cannot be replicated by a Slack chat room or even over FaceTime or even a Zoom. I mean, how many of us did Zoom stuff for camp back in 2020? And It was nice to see everybody, but I think that even after you got off the Zoom, and I did that with my camp, we got off the Zoom, the effect lasted for about half an hour, but then I was like slammed back into my life. It was so stark. And also the interaction with the staff and the kids, I can't pretend like it was anything close to what would happen if we were together. So I think social media helps bridge the gap. I don't know. I have to think about that. I think it helps bridge the gap, but I don't think it's helping to, I don't know. I'm going to stop there. If somebody else.
Yeah, I don't think it's a full replacement, and I don't think it ever will be. And I think about this idea of the metaverse and whatnot. I just don't. There is a value when you see your staff meet each other again in person that is different, even if they've texted every day since they've last seen them, and especially if they meet in person on site at camp for an event. And I got to witness this last weekend, right? Just staff from last summer signing up to be participants in our first youth weekend since the pandemic began. And trust me, they were overjoyed to be at camp with the people that they spent all last summer with, right? And as professionals, as the four of us as professionals, I'm sure we've all tried to join a group that, online that is meaningful, but I have yet to find that success or be able to create and manage that group, right? I don't know that I yeah, it's an added bonus that you get to communicate with people that are far away that you would never have called in the 80s and 90s, right? Because phone, it was too expensive. It's an added bonus to see their life happening before you, but it's like you're viewing their photo album from a distance, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think that it replaces the power that camp has to bring them together for a purpose.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can we spend a little bit of time before we wrap this up about the value of an emotional home and um, without opening, so I don't want to, there are so many big topics that branch off from that little moment. But I just want to push on that one thing. How do we make sure that camp is an let's not say emotional home. How do we say that camp is an emotional touch point for staff that empowers them throughout the year?
I think there's I one of my friends is a child psychiatrist, and he's I wanted him to come and meet one of our campers that was struggling with permission from the family, and he now I'm saying he, and we are an all girls camp, but he was one of our, we have Waro boys as well sometimes, just like foster boys. They're lovely, and they consider themselves Waro girls. And one of the things that he said to me that was really interesting was, because I was worried about, where he was going to go after camp. And I was worried about, him, feeling like he couldn't create this back at home. And he really struggled at home. And what this friend of mine said was, the first step to any change, any possibility, any hope is just allowing children and young adults to experience the possibility of an alternative way of living, and that you should not try to put more pressure on yourself to make certain lessons stick. What we want is for them to experience it, because when they experience those positive relationships, when they experience being respected, when they experience that kindness is not based on who you are as a person, but it is owed to you no matter what. When you experience these things, this gives you the alternative possibility that when you go back home, this is what you're looking for. This is what you're aiming for. And it might not happen in your young adult life, or even in your teen life, but it can start to potentially happen when you are able to have a little bit more agency. So I think for me, this is something I try to hold on to. What am I doing at camp? And how am I being as transparent as possible, particularly with my staff, in the intention behind why we're doing what we're doing, so that they can see that there's possibility and they can choose. If the environment supports them, they can at least try to seek out a similar environment and similar people that are going to treat them and care for them the way I hope they experienced at camp.
I think it's really important that we as camp professionals understand that we can only do what we can do.
Fair.
Once they leave camp, and I think about this all the time as a Christian camp that we're not actively evangelizing our camp experience, but when kids leave camp or staff leave camp, we have zero support structure outside of camp to help them on the rest of their faith journey. Just the same as we have, what online does provide is a very small support structure to help them on their emotional journey or to recreate that space. But in reality, we can only do what we can do. And I think that we would undersell ourselves if we don't think that we have to give our youth the belief that it's your response, your emotional safety is your responsibility. And I know that phrase, you have to think through it a little bit, but the idea that we need to give them the tools to build that safety it's owed to them. I get it, but they also need to take it, meaning that they need to know they have the right to be emotionally safe wherever they are. And here are the tools to help them. And I think that for everything in life, be it life skills, be it training, be it anything, what we do in 2 months of camp is try to make them, what I believe is we try to make them better people. And we try to give them the skills to leave camp and be better people. And if camp is their emotionally safe place, I want them to carry that little bit with them, but I want them to be able to use that little bit when they're not here and when they've moved on to another camp, or they've moved on to a university or a college, or because my buddy Pat once did a session, this is 30 years ago almost, about the baggage kids bring to camp, and it wasn't in first session. So he brought in this bag, and people thought, oh, it's a bag, it's a bag of clothes and whatnot. But the stuff that Pat pulled out of that bag, right, like the beer bottles and the alcoholism and the abuse and the things that these kids bring and staff bring to camp as baggage, we can't solve every problem. We can only give them the tools. We can only do what we can do. So I think that we need to be that emotionally safe place, and we need to give them those skills to go. So yeah.
I want to plus one what everyone else said very eloquently. I'm not going to restate it. Although, as I was sitting here, I was thinking that, we've been talking a lot about how to support our staff as they transition back to the real world. But, I think I really like what Joe suggests is that, I always think about camp as an education space. And I know at our camp, at so many camps, like what we are trying to do is create a world that is the world that we all want to live in. It's the world that we all did live in as children before we were taught that, the things about us or the things that we liked or the things that we enjoyed were weird or wrong or all that negative stuff. Like we create that world. And so like part of the experience is charging our staff and kids to go back into the world and project that. The only reason why that place isn't this place is because more people don't do what camp people do. So that's the charge that we can give our staff as they, thank God we do have social media because they can stay in touch some way, which was really different back in the 90s. You were completely separated unless you wanted to get into the wild, wild world of pen pals. Wild world of pen pals. We completely separate. So at least there's a little bit of connection. But I think that really is, for better or for worse, I think that's the charge that we give our community, like go out into the world and create this wherever you are.
Thank you to the three of you for your intention and your thoughtfulness on this topic. If you listeners or people who are watching on YouTube have enjoyed this conversation or have some thoughts about it, feel free to leave us a comment on the YouTube. Send a comment to me, Travis at gocamp.pro. If you think that it would be thought-provoking for someone else, then I encourage you to share this episode with a friend as well. I want to take a second before we do our upcoming tool of the weeks, and there are some really fun tools of the week coming. I want to take a second and thank our sponsor, UltraCamp. UltraCamp has been a wonderful company helping us make sure that we get the CampHacker show out this year. So I want to thank them for that. If you are a CampHacker listener, you can go to ultracampmanagement.com/CampHacker and download the free marketing tips and tools called the Marketing Toolbox that UltraCamp has provided for us. One of the things that UltraCamp really helps their clients do is focus on getting out of the office and getting on to making the impact that we've been talking about today. So the folks at UltraCamp know that you didn't get into this because you love paperwork. They created the software that will help camp professionals like yourselves handle camp registration quickly and efficiently. With UltraCamp, you have no limits. You have no limits on the custom reports. You have no limits on support. You have no limits on the training. You have no limits on the number of users that you can do, so you can spread out the work and delegate the work. UltraCamp's goal is to provide resources so that the clients can spend more time in camp and out of the office. And if this doesn't sound like your registration software, don't you think it should? Visit their website at ultracampmanagement.com/camphacker and set up a time to chat. They look forward to having a chat with you and talking about UltraCamp. So we are on to our tool of the week. We're excited to prevent. Each of us have brought a tool that we think will help you be a better camp director. Also code for, these are things that make us happy that we think also would make camp people happy as well. So I don't know who started last time. I'm picking Gab to start this time.
Awesome. My tool of the week is a project management system called Monday.com. And it is a paid system. But since we've been using it for the past 4 months, it has really made our communication clearer with our team. And more importantly, I sleep better at night because I know what I need to get done for the next couple of days. And I also know that other things I worry about, there's already time allotted to take care of it. It can do things such as Gantt charts, create a calendar, tag people that you're going to be working on projects with, create start timelines, as well as milestones and deadlines, have reminders, and it can work on multiple devices. And the only thing that is, I would say, a little constructive feedback back for Monday.com is its actual name, Monday.com. So when you would say it's on Monday, I'd be like, is that the meeting on Monday, or is that on the program Monday?
Yes, of course.
So our team affectionately call it Mayday. So we use Mayday, and we don't want something to become a Mayday. That's why we use Mayday. But for about a week, Jackie was like, I'm looking for Mayday and I can't find it. We're like, it's you have to search Monday. But that's the only little thing. But once you wrap your head around that, the rest has been great. And one of our staff members, she researches these types of programs so effectively. So we've looked at a whole bunch of programs, and this is the one that she came up with. And I think she made the right choice.
Excellent. Thanks, Gabz. Joe, what's your tool?
My tool of the week this week is a board game called Super Mega Lucky Box, which is the best. Follow the link if you go to the show notes and see the link. But the best way to describe it is it's a number. It's like Yahtzee on steroids, where you have to plan out and get points. There's only 4 rounds. Those 4 rounds, once they're done, the game is over. You add up your points and you move to it. What I love about it is it's 1 to 6 players, and it's great. And my wife, who refuses to play board games with me, I don't know why, I do not know why, will play this with me because I haven't figured out how to win it. So she's beaten me 3 times. So Super Mega Lucky Box.
Endorsed by Jen.
Red all the way.
Chris.
I am also going to recommend a game. This was
a good day in podcasting.
It's a good day for gaming. This game was super popular, and I was surprised that this was never recommended on this podcast before. There's a game called Codenames, which is it's ostensibly a board game. There's a collection of words in a grid that you lay out on the table, and it's 2 teams. And the one team, the clue giver, is given a map where they see which words of the grid they want their team to guess and to pick, and the other team has different words. And so the idea is that you give 1-word clues to your team to make them pick the correct words. These are just common words: dolphin, Malaysia, chocolate. Just pick the words that you need to win. It is really a lot of fun. It is super, super engaging and super interactional. And the reason why I'm recommending it here is because it's easily adaptable to like a large camp game. You make your own cards, you build a huge board. It's great. You can also play online, and both links are going to be in the show notes. And it's great. Check it out. Codenames. If you're one of the few people who haven't heard of Codenames yet, like, get all the way into it. Okay, that's it.
I love Codenames. We have Codenames Pictures, which is also fun because it's sort of a random image that you have to figure out a way to communicate the what you want people to pick, as Chris described. If you have been a trained adventure facilitator, you'd know that part of the stages of good adventure facilitation is communication exercises. And this is such a fun way to introduce a communication exercise, because without saying the word, you're trying to imply the word and get people to pick. And sometimes you need to find ways to group words or pictures together that don't have a great connection, and it's just a fun exercise. Also, like you say, Chris, for picturing it as being a camp game, this would be an awesome thing to have blown up onto 8x10 pictures and have them laying on the floor of your picnic shelter on the concrete, and people being able to kind of walk around. Like, it's one of those cool games that you could make camp sized really easily, and figure it out. And as Chris said, you could adapt it using your own images or your own words to be a part of that.
That'd be so cool. Yeah, it's so great. Take your inspiration and run.
Yeah. That is a great one. Thank you. I'm going to return to a pick that I picked either last year or the year before, which is the service Libro.fm. As usual, for all the tools, you go to camphacker.tv/podcast, and you'll see the show notes from this episode and all the others. Libro.fm provides audiobooks, a service like audible.com, but it's not owned by Amazon. They make a point of supporting independent bookstores so that you can designate, this is my independent bookstore near me. Even though I'm buying audiobooks from you, Libro.fm, a piece of that money goes to support my local bookstore. So I'm sure it's not a ton of money that they get for every book that I buy, but it makes me happy to support a bookstore that I see is doing great things. So that is my choice at camphacker.tv/podcast for the show notes to see the link to join. I am an affiliate for Libro because I love it so much and talk about it on social media so much. They asked me to be. So you're helping us make the show by joining via that link. So there you go. I want to take just a second and highlight another podcast in the Go Camp Pro network. And I want to talk about Camp Code by asking Gab to talk about Camp Code, the other podcast that she is on in the network, podcast focused on staff training. Gab, have there been some moments or highlights that you think, maybe just new ideas that have come out in Camp Code this year that you think people would love and could really grow from?
I mean, I it's hard for me to say off the top of my head. What I can say is that after every single episode, I'm desperate to debrief for at least a half an hour to go through the ideas that Beth and Ruby bring to the table. And we all work differently in how we bring our material to the table. And every single episode, we've been doing these episodes, I don't know, 6 or 7 seasons now, and I'm constantly still learning. And it's just a joy and a pleasure and a privilege to work with Beth and Ruby on Camp Code. And I'm always learning on staff training, which is for me the most important part of camp is staff training. So we have to put our time and energy into it, and listening to Camp Code can help with that.
One of the other things that happens with Camp Code that I really like, do you call it the recap, Gab? Is that what it is? The recap. Gab creates a highlight at the end of every episode of all the smart things that the three of them have said and shared. So you get the whole detail and you get the highlights, just the things to remember. So
yeah, well, that's because there's so many good things, and that came out naturally because I just needed to recap all of the brilliant stuff that was said. So it's a fun show. Yeah.
So if you are looking to increase the impact of your staff training or just get good ideas that have been tried and true, please search for Camp Code in your podcasting app and subscribe there. So thank you to the three of you for being here, for sharing your good ideas. If folks are looking to reach out and follow up, about specifics that people have said, go to the show notes at camphacker.tv/podcast. If you have big ideas or direct feedback, you can send them to Travis at gocamp.pro. Joe, thanks for being on. Joe's waving.
I was waving. I was on another screen when you said that, but see you later. Oh, my life is so hard, people. So hard.
Oh gosh.
Thanks, Joe. Chris,
Bye.
thank you for sharing this week.
Sure. Thanks. I'm super thankful to be here. So
Awesome.
thanks, everybody.
You sound
Gab, I appreciate you, and thank you for the great ideas today.
Thanks, team. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for the evening, friends.